there really isn't anything I can come up with that exceeds what the man himself can accomplish. So I'm just going to say, ladies and gentlemen, our friend, Bill Whittle.
Thank you very much, Full S. That's the nickname that Bert Rutan has given to Brett Regan because he doesn't do anything half-assed. He's a remarkable guy. First of all, before I start tonight, I'd like to say how much we both appreciate the kindness and the hospitality you've all shown to me and my beautiful wife, Natasha, here. Two foreigners in your beautiful state and your beautiful country. Natasha from Russia, me from California, and we both enjoy coming to visit America, and it's a real pleasure and honor to be here. Somebody who saw me here last time 5 years ago said, you seem still like you've got some fire in you, but you seem much happier. And it's true. My wife has just made my life just so wonderful down there. It's just turned me into an entirely different person. It's might as well be living in Idaho, honestly. It's really been that good for me. I'd also like to tell all of you that when I do go back and visit California and people say, what is Coeur d'Alene like? Or Idaho? My response is, oh man, it's a pit. I don't know what's worse. I think when all the dead fish rise up in that so-called lake of theirs and the stink just spreads out all over the city and the epidemic needles, you don't want to go anywhere near the Kootenai. It's actually very, very good to be back. It's great always to see our friends, the wonderful Pinkerton family here. There's just been such inspiration for all of us and all of that. And needless to say, this is the 6th or 7th or 8th time I've stayed with Bert and Tanya Rutan. And as you probably know, I'm a pilot and wanted to be an astronaut my whole life. And Bert Rutan's just been one of my heroes for as long as I can remember anything. And it's just to try and tell you what it's like to come up and actually, spend time with somebody who's a lifelong idol. It's almost impossible for me to tell you just how very, very disappointing that is. I just finished working on a 12-part series on the Cold War, and I had realized at the time that the Cold War was America's longest conflict. If you started at the Berlin blockade in 1948 compared to the fall of the Soviet Union, it's a 42-year-long war. And I realized, strangely enough, I should have thought of this much earlier, actually the Cold War is the second longest war in America's history. The first longest war in America's history is still going on. The longest war in American history is the culture war. We don't think about it as a war because we're not using bullets and battleships, we're using ideas, we're using stories, but it is a war for the entire soul and the future of this country, and the left has been at war with us culturally for 53 years at the very least. At the very least. I'm not really old enough to be a cold warrior, but I am old enough to be a culture warrior, and I would just like to tell you now that my take, and I'm about to defend this position, my take on the culture war is the same take as Ronald Reagan's was on the Cold War. When they asked him what his strategy should be for the Cold War, Ronald Reagan said, we win, they lose. And that's exactly what has happened in the culture war. We win, they lose. I know you don't believe me, but you will by the time I'm done in half an hour. Okay, so we've already got a convert over here. On June 4th of 1942, in the space of 6 minutes, the war in the Pacific was won during the Battle of Midway. 6 minutes. 4 Japanese carriers were mortally wounded by American aviators at the Battle of Midway. That happened on June 4th, 1942. At that moment, after the 7th minute, the war in the Pacific was won. But it wasn't over. It was far from over. All the real killing and dying happened after the war was won. It was won at Midway. The Japanese never, ever got the initiative again after that. But all of the killing and dying, Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, the Solomons, all of it happened after the war was won. And that's exactly what's happening in this culture war, too. The war is won, but it's not over. And things are going to get worse before they get better, but you need to understand that this thing is done and it's over, and they lose and we win. And I'm about to show you why.
Awesome.
2 years ago, I saw a slide that made my blood run cold. It was an electoral map of the United States, and it showed what the country would look like if only millennials voted. And if only millennials voted, it turns out that we would carry Utah with 6 electoral votes, and that's it. If only millennials voted, the Democrats would win the generic presidential race, generic Republican versus generic Democrat. They'd win by a score of 532 to 6 in the Electoral College. And I saw that chart and I saw those statistics and my blood just ran cold, and I just thought, my God, we're in real trouble. And then over the course of the last 2 years, something really remarkable has happened. I've been watching the pop culture very carefully. And I've been watching these young people, and we all know about all the young people out there who are talking about socialism and Bernie and more socialism, and how popular socialism is, and how popular socialism is on campus, and how popular socialism is among young people, and we hear it again and again and again and again and again. And it's true that they talk like socialists, and it's even true to some extent that they vote like socialists, but they don't act like socialists, these young people. None of them do. None of them. I was at Oberlin College, 6-7 years ago now. It's the most liberal college in America. Oberlin is, where reason and logic go to die. And I was in Oberlin College in a stadium auditorium, and it was filled with people, and this is 2010, 11. I said, how many of you out there consider yourself to be socialists? And about 7 out of 10 raised their hands. If I asked that question at Oberlin today, it'd be 10 out of 10, I guarantee you. And I said, okay, 7 out of 10 raise your hands. So I just looked at them out there and I said, okay, socialists, what is it that you believe in? What's your philosophy? And they honestly couldn't tell me. I mean, it's just like silent like it is right now. And I just said, it's not really my job to argue your side of the argument, but I got a little time on my hands. So isn't it really from each according to his ability, to each according to his need? Isn't that socialism? Isn't that what Karl Marx said? We're going to take from the people who have more and give it to the people who have less, right? From each according to his ability, to each according to his need. Yeah, that's it. That's what we like. That's what we're really behind. So I said, okay, socialists, here's what we're going to do. What kind of phones do you have? I have an iPhone 5 at the time, and I want to know what kind of phones you guys have. And somebody's, why do you want to know? Not a Democrat, I'm not going to steal them from you. I just would like you to come down, because we're going to put a little basket in front of the room here, and when you come down, bring your phones, and into this basket, we're going to put in all the cell phones that I see up here being held up by socialists, and that's got to be $2,000 worth of electronics in this room right now. So, we're going to put them in a basket, and then all of us together, I'm not going to go out with your phones, all of us together will go to downtown Cleveland, and we'll palm these fine phones, and that'll be probably $2,000. That's $120 bills, and then all of us together will drive through the streets of Cleveland, handing out $20 bills to people who are in greater need than you. So bring them on down, and you will never guess what didn't happen. One kid, one socialist, one Bernie supporter actually said to me, but this is my phone. I said, well, technically speaking, it's your dad's, but let's not split it. Yes, it's your phone. It is your phone. You own your phone. It's your property. You like it. You get enjoyment out of it. And if you don't like the idea of somebody else telling you to take your property and liquidate it so you can give to people in greater need than you, then you're not socialist at all. You're rock-ribbed conservatives. I'm looking at a room full of William F. Buckley's up here, and all you do is talk, but when it comes time to actually act, none of you do it. Every single one of you kids here in Oberlin, every single one of you has an Xbox or a PlayStation. Every single one of you has a toy that costs $450 that could feed a family or probably a village in Africa for a year. Every one of you has the opportunity to sell this toy and distribute the money to those of you in greater need. And none of you do it because none of you are socialists, because if you were, there'd be a basket full of phones down there right now. And this is quite a remarkable observation when you think about it. I had a similar kind of discussion. It really wasn't too much longer after that. I was talking about capitalism and wealth creation, and one of these kids said to me, Arch, you make some interesting points, but surely you can't possibly defend capitalism to the degree where somebody could have like 5 houses. Somebody's rich enough to have 3 houses or 5 houses. You can't possibly defend that. This was several years before Bernie had 3 houses, by the way. And I said to this kid, I said, how many songs do you have on your phone right now? How many songs do you have on your iPhone or your Samsung or whatever? He said, I don't know. Why? I said, I'm just curious, man. How many songs do you have? So he looked down. He said, I don't know, 750, something like that. I said, so let me ask you something. Do you listen to all 750 songs at the same time? No. Really? Has it been years since you heard some of those songs, maybe? Every one of those songs cost $1 to download. That's $750. You couldn't get by on $50 and only have 50 songs and then donate $700 to the poor? You had to have $750 of songs all for yourself? You can't listen to them all at the same time. I'm ashamed to be seen in the same room as you. And they're stuck. They're stuck. Because no matter what they say, no matter how they act, no matter what they tell you, they are not socialists because they like their stuff just like we do. And that is a fundamental thing that we need to understand. You cannot beat the biology out of people. You can brainwash them and you can tell them things, but you can't beat the biology out of people. And here's another big data point, it's much, much more important. If you look at what young people have been doing for the last 20 years, especially the last 20 years, it goes back even further than that. But more and more, every single year, I've got all the numbers to back it up, more and more young people spend more and more time playing computer games. Every single year, more and more young people spend more and more time playing computer games. I think the average is 4 or 5 hours a day. It's probably 6 or 7 in some cases, entire weekends. They say millennials don't have an attention span. But there are millennials who get a brand new video game and they will play that thing straight through for 50 hours until it's finished. And they won't stop. They continue to play video games all the time. Now, what happens in a video game? As it turns out, by happy coincidence, I'm the world's oldest video gamer. I'm 60 years old, and if I'd been another 2 years old, I would have missed it, but I didn't. I started with the Apple IIe with 64K of RAM, and I've played virtually every video game since then. So what happens? What happens in every single video game, essentially every single video game out there? What happens? It's unique to none of them. It goes all across the spectrum to every single video game. In video games, you do 2 things. You make money, and you buy weapons. And the better weapons you have, the more money you make. And the more money you make, the better weapons you can get. And I said to myself, hang on now, I'm a conservative gladiator. I like making money and buying weapons. What's going on here? What's happening? Why is this generation of young so-called socialists spending hours and hours and hours behind closed doors making money and buying weapons? And then I realized, and you may think I'm joking, I'm as serious as I can be. Millennials are spending more and more and more time playing computer games because it is a place where they get to act like conservatives. They get to shoot things. They get to blow things up. They get to drive too fast. They get to make money and keep it and spend it on the things they want. They got loud guns, fast cars, and hot women, and they are acting like all the things that make life worth living. And they're acting like conservatives in the only place where they're allowed to act like conservatives, which is by themselves. Because if they had any of these natural thoughts in the real world, they would be demonized, they would be excommunicated, and all the rest. So, if you think that the peer pressure and social proof on us is hard, we grew up with decent values. Imagine what it's got to be like to be a 20-year-old kid, some guy in one of these colleges, who every day has to get up and say, oh, you're a white male, straight Christian, yeah, I'm sorry, you know, I was just born that way, please don't take, I really apologize. They bow and scrape. Nobody can stand up to that kind of pressure. Nobody can stand up to that kind of social pressure. And so they don't. So they just bow and shuffle themselves out of there, and they walk off of that campus, and they get to their house, and they pull out a couple of Red Bulls and a bag of Doritos, and they go down into the basement, and then they become conservatives for 10 hours, and for 10 hours they have actual fun. Just them. What do you say? There's no question about it. It's not like this is a theory. the numbers for how many hours these people spend playing video games and how those numbers continue to go up, and that's what happens in video games. And in video games, by the way, in video games, especially games like Call of Duty, Modern Warfare, these combat games, these millennials, right this second as we're talking, these Bernie voting millennials, these socialists, are out there right this second, and they are laying down covering fire and suppressing fire, and they're parachuting out of C-47s into Normandy on D-Day, and they are kicking butt and killing Japs, and they're doing all of that stuff. All of it. They're doing it right now. And they're doing it in the only place that they're allowed to do it. Now we get to the part that's actually kind of interesting and cool. They also retreat into movies and pop culture. Movies, Marvel Comics Universe, Star Wars, Star Trek, all of this stuff. You know, I know this is going to come as a surprise to you. I'm not going to say that you're going to be surprised if I tell you that Hollywood is a little left-leaning. But you will probably be blown away to know that all entertainment is conservative. All of it. Real entertainment, all entertainment, is inherently conservative. You may think, how can you say such a thing? I would say to you, it's very simple. The reason I can tell you that all entertainment is conservative is because nobody has, and nobody will, ever spend money to go see a James Bond movie where James Bond confronts the supervillain armed with a strongly worded letter from the United Nations and then drive up in a Prius at a reasonable speed. Nobody will ever go see that movie. Ever. Entertainment, storytelling, we're talking about the culture war. We're talking about a war of ideas. We're talking about a war with people who are afraid of can openers. That's why they're not coming at us with guns. We've been all armored up, all ammoed up, waiting for people to come at us with guns. They're terrified of guns. Hooray! But they're coming at us with ideas, and that means movies and pop culture. And when you go to a movie, let me just take that back. How many of you out here have ever been hypnotized? Anybody ever been hypnotized? Hypnotized to the degree where you've had a hypnotic suggestion implanted? Anybody? No. You've all been hypnotized thousands of times. All of you in this room have been hypnotized thousands of times. Thousands of times. You want me to prove it? I'll prove it. I'm going to give you the hypnotic suggestion. I'm going to start a sentence, and you're going to finish it for me, because it's been hypnotically implanted in your minds. Ready? Here we go. Look, up in the sky, it's a bird. You didn't have to check your cell phones. You didn't have to say, what was it, the bird thing? No. Every single part of that sentence you know in your bones because you took it in hundreds of times. And you took it into the bottom of your brain, and everything that came with it, everything that Superman represented, forces of morality and good and strength that's restrained only by his own virtue, all of that's in your head, along with look up in the sky, it's a bird, it's a plane, it's Superman. You were hypnotized. And when you go to a movie, you can go to Sherman Oaks, California, let's make it even worse, go to Mojave, where it is 115 degrees outside in the shade. And it's a Saturday afternoon, and you're sitting in a room full of people like yourself, and you've got a big drink in one hand, and a big bottle, a big thing of popcorn in the other, and you're watching a vampire movie. And all of a sudden, this guy with fangs comes out of a dark alley, and you jump out of your chair. You jump out of your chair because you're not really in the movie theater. Where you really are is in Transylvania in 1832. Because when you watch movies, you undergo a process called the willing suspension of disbelief. What you basically say is, I'm going to spend the next 2 hours with this film, and I'm going to agree to believe in vampires for the length of time that it takes for us to get through this story. And that means that all of your critical facilities, all of your reason, all of your rationality is gone. And every message that comes to you through television and movies goes straight into your subconscious mind. Look up in the sky, it's a bird, it's a plane, it's super. It goes right in there. And so this is the weapon that they've been using against us. And they've lost. They've lost. And I'll show you why. There is a particularly repellent insect out there. A really, really vile and disgusting. I mean, honestly, if you really look it up, it's just horrible. And I'm not talking about Nancy Pelosi. It's called a parasite wasp. And the parasite wasp lives like this. It finds another insect, it finds another being, and injects its eggs into it. And then the eggs grow inside of that other bug. And then those eggs hatch out and kill the host. It's basically a kind of a creature that lives on other creatures' life forces. Kind of is like Nancy Pelosi now that. But this parasite wasp is successful because it hides its eggs inside of something else. And this is what the progressives have been doing for the last 53 years of the culture war. They have taken their ideas and hidden them in things so that people would accept them, because nobody wants them. Nobody wants them, and everybody knows it. They know it too. Why is it that until, by the way, after this is over, I think we should take up a small fund, privately funded. I don't want to use government funds for this, but I think we should pass the hat around the room and come up with enough money to erect a 50-foot golden statue of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. A golden statue of her 50 feet high. Because that woman is so stupid that she doesn't know that she's not supposed to say what they really believe. She's supposed to say what you think you want them to believe. But she's not smart enough to know that. So she states what they really believe. And nobody wants what they really believe, which is why they can't tell you what they really believe. You're dealing with people in Hollywood and all of these liberals, these limousine liberals, they make millions of dollars. Oh, we should raise taxes because, we're rich and we need to help poor people. By the way, Jim, try and walk us to the line on the taxes. Just put our toes over the line, but, don't jump. Cut our taxes as low as possible. All of this hypocrisy, all of it again and again and again. Oh, guns are bad. No, guns are bad. No, they cause all kinds of problems. And I've got to run now. My security team is out back. My armed security team. It's a life of hypocrisy. If they told you the truth, you wouldn't buy it. So they don't. They tell you what you think you want to hear from them. And that's how they succeed. They use this kind of strategy of sort of hiding things in different things. So this has been going on for a while. They took over the news media, they took over universities, took over all this stuff. But what I've seen in the last 2 years, and has given me so much hope, is this. In the last 2 years, 3 or 4 years, but really the last 2 years, the parasite wasp of left-wing progressivism has tried to inject itself into the things that people love in the pop culture. And that means things like video games, Star Wars, Star Trek, Doctor Who, Ghostbusters, The Terminator, all of these things, all of them. They've injected their philosophy into these movies in such a way that you will learn your lesson, because these people think that if you tell the people the story, then they'll become the kind of person you want. They believe that culture creates the individual, when an idiot can see that the culture is the product of the individual. They got it backwards like they got everything else backwards. They think if we can keep telling you the right story, you'll turn into liberals. They really do believe this. So that's what they've been trying to do. They've been trying to do something that is a term that's going to be new for most of you, but what the progressives have been trying to do to this country, and they've done especially hard in the last couple of years in entertainment, is they are trying to retcon the United States. They're trying to retcon this country. What does that mean? Retcon is a term used in fandom. It's used in Star Wars and Star Trek and all the rest. Retcon stands for retroactive continuity. Retroactive continuity means that if I have a position now that's different than the position that we took 10, 15 years ago, then I have to go back and change that position, because otherwise I look like a hypocrite. I have to go back and rewrite history. I can't stand here and say something different than what Lenin said or whoever the case may be. I got to go back and change the history so that there's continuity. I'm going to retroactively make continuity for my particular political theories. So what does that mean? Well, let's take one that's just the easiest one to understand. Let's just stay with Star Wars for a second. Listen, here's something you need to know about Star Wars if you don't already. Younger people probably know this. But Star Wars, up until recently, Star Wars was the religion of post-Christian America. It was the religion of post-Christian America. It's a religion that young people could get behind because they wouldn't be white, straight, Christian, whatever the case may be. All those people are racist and they're ignorant and all the rest of this stuff. But Star Wars was a religion for the entire generation. And you can see 35, 40-year-olds today who are at work in insurance companies with their little Luke Skywalker action figures on their desk because it's their religion. It's the same way people used to put up crosses and things. It's the religion of post-Christian America. Star Wars is the story about an individual, and unfortunately for the left, it wasn't a big deal at the time, but unfortunately for the left, Star Wars is the story about a young, straight male who, through acts of courage and persistence, finds himself The ability to get into a beat-up old X-Wing starfighter and then go up there against waves and waves and waves of this well-armed, well-funded superstate, and through sheer guts and sacrifice, destroy the Death Star, destroy that thing that's hanging over everybody's head and keeping them in fear. That's what Star Wars was. Now, if you're one of these people who feel that you can control the message, meaning you can control the people, you can't have that. You can't have that. You cannot have that as being the primary moral code of the culture. You can't have that as the religion of America. It's got to be destroyed. It's got to be retconned. You can't control people who believe in individuals getting up there and fighting the powerful state. No, you've got to change that message, and you can't just add to it. You have to go back and destroy it. So, a couple years ago, the last Star Wars movie, just before this last one, which utterly tanked, the last Star Wars movie is called The Last Jedi, and you see Luke Skywalker as an old man. Here's the man who's the most optimistic person in the history of the galaxy. His father was a force of pure evil, 7 foot tall, dressed in black, wearing a Nazi helmet, and Luke Skywalker had the goodness and the kindness to still see that there was good inside of Darth Vader, and he redeemed him before he died. Well, what did the left do to that person? What did the left retcon that guy into? In The Last Jedi, Luke Skywalker is a bitter, angry loner. He doesn't believe in the Jedi anymore. He doesn't believe in anything he used to believe in. He's a potential murderer. He's an angry, old, cranky, bitter man who doesn't believe in anything and who spends his days on a remote island taking green milk out of some kind of space cow. He's a bitter, angry loser, and everybody who ever loved Luke Skywalker had to watch that movie and realize, well, that's it. You've done it. You've just destroyed everything that I love. And they can't get away from it. It's canon. It showed up in the movie. It's the same actor. He's done. Luke Skywalker's gone. And when they destroyed Luke Skywalker, they destroyed Star Wars. And that's why the last movie tanked. And that's why there is no more Star Wars. I listen to people, I don't listen to Rush Limbaugh, because I don't need the embarrassment, frankly, of seeing somebody that far beyond what I'm able to do. But I will tell you this, I do watch lots and lots of channels about pop culture, and all of these channels that talked about Star Wars, when this thing came out, they were angry, and after they were angry, they were heartbroken, and now they're not even heartbroken anymore. Now they just don't care. They just don't care. I used to love Star Wars, it's dead to me, now I don't care. And they did the same thing with Star Trek. They did the same thing with Doctor Who. They did the same thing with Ghostbusters and Terminator and all of it. The left has gone into these iconic movies and rewritten the history so that back in time it turned out, no, these weren't conservative values. This is liberal values. The Skywalker hero, that's a woman. That's a woman. It's not a guy. No, that's Rey. And then Ghostbusters, no, those are 4 women. And Doctor Who, no, it's a woman. In fact, the original Doctor Who was a black woman. And they keep going back. The next James Bond movie, 007, is going to be a black woman. They go back and try to rewrite history in order to make their philosophy sellable to people. And it doesn't work. And I'll give you one example because you need to know specifically exactly how this works. If you saw, anybody here see the original Star Wars when it came out in 1977? A lot of you did. Okay, great. So in the original Star Wars, when you first meet Han Solo, it's at the Cantina bar, and he's met Obi-Wan, and he's met Luke, and he's going to go get the Millennium Falcon ready, and as he's walking out of this cantina, this green reptile named Greedo, a bounty hunter, puts a gun on him. He says, sit down. Something like that. Sit down, Solo. Subtitles come up. So now Han's got a gun pulled on him. He's got a gun in his face. So he sits down in the bar, behind the booth, and this green reptile bounty hunter says, I'm going to take you to Jabba the Hutt, and he's going to kill you for what you did to him, and I'm going to enjoy watching you die. And this whole time you see Han Solo just kind of casually, just kind of reach around, undoes his blaster, and finally he says, yeah, I'll bet you will. And under the table he pulls the trigger and blows a hole this big in that green reptile, and he goes face down like that, stone cold dead. I saw it in movie theaters. People came out of their chairs cheering. Because everybody knew that when there's a gun on you, you're now a question of life and death. Of course it was justified. Now we get to the point. It was 1977. In 1998, they re-released Star Wars with all kinds of additional special effects. And one of the special effects they added was in that scene, with the exact same footage, they changed it. They changed the scene. They changed it so that Greedo shoots first. This professional alien bounty hunter, who's as far away from this guy as this flag is to me, misses, hits the wall, and then Han Solo shoots him. And when you're asked why, you hear from George Lucas, well, we don't want Han can't shoot first. Guns are bad anyway. And we don't want him shooting first. It sends a bad message to children. Now, if you don't own Star Wars on VHS tape, you will never, ever be able to find the scene where Han shot first. It's gone. You can't buy it for love of money. If you do not have a 1977 version of Star Wars, Greedo shoots first. And young people for whom this is religion, I could walk into a room of young people anywhere in the country, completely without introduction, and say simply, who shot first? All say Han shot first. They have had the history that they saw with their own eyes rewritten in front of their eyes, and then they've been told, no, you're crazy, you must be crazy. It was always Greedo shot first. They're being gaslighted, the way that they've gaslighted this entire country, the way that they've rewritten all of our history. You know, the Democrats, the caring people, the non-racists, the ones that held the slaves, the ones that left the Union to form the Confederacy when it turned out that there was a Republican president who was against slavery. Those guys, you know, the good guys, the guys who started Jim Crow laws, the guys who turned the fire hose on all those kids going to college in 1964, those guys, no, they were always the good guys. They were always the good guys. Republicans were the bad guys. You ask young people today, and I'm not joking about this, you go out and ask young people today, someplace like on Santa Monica Pier, whether Abraham Lincoln was a Republican or a Democrat, 9 out of 10 will tell you he's a Democrat. And if you show them that he wasn't, they will fall down. They have retconned the country. They've made it retroactively continuous. We're Democrats. We want the vote of black people. We've always been in favor of black people. It's the Republicans who have always been the racists. So here's where we get to the part that is really very encouraging. In order to understand the power of this, you do really need to believe me when I tell you that Star Wars, as one example, is religion for this entire generation. So, what's happened? What's happened? As the left has put their values into Star Wars and Star Trek and all the rest, what's happened? Have they turned them into a generation of young socialists with social justice values? They have not. What you find is that young people are not even so young anymore. You'll find that people will walk away from the thing that they love most in life rather than agree to have it be a social justice warrior case of just plain old indoctrination. They'll walk away from Star Wars before they'll accept a left-wing Star Wars. They'll walk away from it, and their hearts will be broken, but they'll leave. And they'll leave because you can't beat the biology out of people. They'll leave because Han shot first, and they know it. You know, about 2 years ago now, I guess, a video game came out, excellent, really superb video game called Red Dead Redemption Part 2. It's a Western game. You get on a horse, you ride around, you can shoot people, you can buy things, whatever you want to do. Red Dead Redemption video game, when it was released, in 2 days, made $550 million. In 2 days. From people who don't have a whole lot of money. Do you know why Red Dead Redemption made $550 million in 2 days? You know why? Because it gave an entire generation a chance to play cowboys and Indians without getting the tar beaten out of them. That's why. It gave them a chance to play cowboys and Indians in peace, in private, in their own basement. They go around and they shoot people. You can't do that in the real world. Obviously, you can't have those kind of values. So they spent $550 million to go to a world they can play cowboys and Indians the way that we used to play cowboys and Indians, but they're not allowed to anymore. So instead of playing cowboys and Indians out in the field, they do it down in the basement. And instead of using a cap gun, they use a computer mouse. But it's the same thing. They want the same thing that we wanted, and they're going after it. And when they try to mess around with computer games, they get very upset. And something else happens too. There was a game called Call of Duty 5. It's a shooter game. You basically go into this world. This one's set in World War II. This game came out from a very liberal studio, conservative game, like all of them, came out. And in Call of Duty 5, in the release trailer, you see that there's these tiger tanks coming through this building. And you see the person who's the hero of the game. Turns out it's a woman. She's wearing a beret. She's shooting back and she runs. As she gets up and starts running, you find out, and I'm not making this up, she's missing an arm. But she has a prosthetic arm with hooks. And then using her prosthetic arm with hooks, she guns down a bunch of tall, 7-foot tall SS guys and beats them to death with a prosthetic hook with a baseball bat. This is their World War II simulator. And anybody who either was in World War II or know anything about World War II is well aware of the fact that the Nazis were defeated by one-armed feminists in combat with the SS. That's how it actually went. Disabled feminists won. So, gamers say, hey, look, we don't have any problem with strong women. We love Lara Croft and all this other stuff. But this is supposed to be a World War II simulation. I'm on board a C-47 over in Normandy on June 6th, and as people are jumping out of the plane, every other voice is a woman's voice. It kind of takes us out of it. And so they said, would you be all right if there was like a little box? Could I check a box at the beginning of this game so that I could play a historically accurate version where all of the characters are male? And you know what the studio came back with? You know what the reply to that was, their public reply? The public reply from the left-wing studio was, would you like us to put that box above or below the box that says white people only? So, here's a guy, millennial, a little older, younger, whatever, not interested in politics ever in their lives. They make a simple request about a historical fact, and the immediate response is, you're a racist and a white supremacist. Welcome to our world, folks. Welcome to our world. They've been called these names directly. They've been called racist because they ask questions like that, and they don't like it. And they don't like the intrusion of this into their world. They've got into this game to get away from the world. Now this thing is following them down there, and that is their downfall. It's their overreach. So, I'm going to conclude with this kind of basic thought. I'd like you to think about this for a second. I contend that this war has been going on for 50 years now. So, if we look back 50 years, let's say 1970. You get that right? Yes. Wow. Now, seriously, how many of you think that the power of the news media was greater in 1970 than it is today? Because I certainly do. I remember Walter Cronkite on CBS Evening News saying, that's the way it is, and that's the way it was. They own the media. They took over the news media. And you think that the news media sells news, but that's not what they sell. They don't sell news. You can get news from a lunatic walking down the street. The news media sells credibility. Credibility means that if you saw something on CNN, you presumably would be something more true than what you hear from that naked raving lunatic out there. Although today I have to tell you, I'm going with the raving lunatic five times out of 10. Those guys are much more honest than CNN today. CNN's credibility is shut. New York Times credibility is shut. All the things that they had, their product, shut. It's gone. The news media is far weaker today than it was 50 years ago. Far weaker. What about Hollywood? What about the effect of movies? Well, 50 years ago, you were dealing with actors like Jimmy Stewart and people who love this country and movies, you know, like It's a Wonderful Life and all these pro-American movies. And they built up all of this goodwill. And then the left went in there with their little parasite wasp attitude and started to infect movies and started to make movie stars think that they're smarter than everybody else and they have a right to tell you how you should behave so that you can be a good progressive just like them. Now, a few weeks ago, they had the Golden Globes in Hollywood, and you had the entire spectrum of the A-list in one room, and Ricky Gervais got up there and he had the guts to say, if you win an award, He said to this entire room, he said, if you win an award, don't tell us about your political opinions. Most of you have had less schooling than Greta Thunberg. Nobody cares. You don't know anything about anything. You live in this bubble of privilege. If you win an award, come up, thank your God, or thank your agent, and then get the F off the stage. And the room was very quiet. But the people watching weren't. I went to the NBC website one day after that happened. The NBC video, this is not a conservative site, the NBC video of that particular speech on Ricky Gervais's part had 6.5 million views in 24 hours, and I read 200 comments deep. I went 200 comments deep, and I didn't find one comment that didn't say, finally, somebody is telling stuck-up, arrogant, immoral losers who make faces for a living that they have no business telling us what we should or should not do. Every single person responding to that said, finally somebody has told these miserable, no-good elitists to just shut up and sing. And so, you can't possibly believe that Hollywood today has more influence than it did 50 years ago because nobody watches movies anymore. They watch YouTube and they watch all this other stuff, member-driven content. So the Hollywood entertainment industry is far weaker because Hollywood used to sell entertainment. But they don't. Once people start preaching at you, they sell indoctrination. Once the news stops giving you credible news, it's selling indoctrination. What about universities? 50 years ago, if you heard that somebody graduated from Harvard, you'd have respect for that person. Now, you know that this person happened to attend a school that costs a lot of money, where they have a safe space in case they hear something that they might find upsetting, and there's little puppies for them to pet, and all the rest of it. That's what a Harvard degree means now. That's what it means. Nobody cares anymore. You went to Harvard? Big deal. Tell me about your safe space. Tell me about your crayons. I don't care. Nobody cares. It's not a university. You made it into what it is, and nobody cares anymore. We don't even need it. If I want to find out something, I'll go to the internet and find out myself. So you can't possibly argue that universities are more powerful today than they were 50 years ago. They're far less important. So what I'm saying is this. Final case, let's talk about democratic politics. Okay, democratic politics used to be maybe a little higher taxes, maybe this or that. We want the country to succeed. Now, democratic politics is so far off base that people have a hard time even defending it or even understanding it. I can give you an example that is really quite telling. Just a few weeks ago, they had the fourth annual Women's March Against Trump, third annual, fourth annual Women's March Against Trump, and all the feminists got out there. And a rogue conservative got out there with a microphone. And they didn't ask anything about Trump. And they didn't ask anything about politics. They went up to the women in this Women's March Against Trump with a microphone, and they simply said to them, "What's a woman?" Crickets. Nothing. The women that were organizing the Women's March Against Trump could not define what a woman is. The interviewer helpfully said, "Would it be somebody who has two X chromosomes?" And the women said, "No, there are many men who identify as women, and if they identify as women, then they're women. So maybe presence of a uterus or something? No, just because you have male sex organs doesn't mean you can be. That doesn't mean you can't be a woman." And you find that their politics are at the point now where the women in the Women's March movement can't define what a woman is. And this gets more and more ridiculous every day, and as it does, people get further and further away from it. It has less and less power. One quick example, because this one's really important. If you have, let's say you're the biggest liberal, you live in Santa Monica, California, let's say, and your daughter's in high school athletics. And let's say you go down to watch her at a track and field event, and you've seen that girl just bust her butt for the last 4 years and train and sweat and all this other stuff. And she gets in the 100-yard dash, and included in that race is a young male who felt like a woman that day, and therefore is allowed to run with the women because he feels like a woman, and if he's not allowed to run with the women, that would hurt his feelings, and that wouldn't be fair. So, if there's one male trans athlete in that race, he's going to come in first. If there are two male trans athletes in the race, they're going to come in first and second. If there are three in that race, your daughter is not going to make the podium. They're going to beat her by 2 seconds in the 100-yard dash. And so now the left has to say, yes. So what do you say to your crying daughter, your perfect liberal crying daughter? What do you say to her? Well, honey, we had to set this up so that even though all the work you did over the last 20 years or 10 years or whatever, it's gone for nothing. Because if we didn't do this, it would hurt his feelings. Her feelings. What about her feelings? What about your daughter's feelings? What about the 9 or 10 million women, young women who are in high school and college athletics? What about their feelings? This is how ridiculous this philosophy has gotten. So you can't tell me that democratic policies are more effective today than they used to be 50 years ago, because they're not. So let's just recap, okay, very quickly. What did we start with? We started with, oh my gosh, news. News used to sell credibility, then they sold indoctrination. Hollywood used to sell entertainment, then they sold indoctrination. Colleges used to sell education, then they sold indoctrination. Politics used to be about solutions, now it's about indoctrination. Now, here's the conclusion. If, over the course of 50 years, the left has used all of these weapons in their repertory that were bright, shiny, new, solid steel weapons 50 years ago, but today have turned into rust in their very hands, if people would rather walk away from the things they love most in the world than accept a left-wing version of them, if all of the media control, if all of the brainwashing, if all of the loudspeakers have fallen to the point where most of them are absolutely ignored now, if 53 years ago the left started its cultural war against the United States of America and they have not won by now, that means they lose. You cannot beat the biology out of people. If young people were going to play video games where they got out in the street and held up signs and did a protest march, I'd be packing up beans and I'd be moving to Idaho. But they're not. They're not. If movies about collectives were making money, I'd be moving someplace like Idaho, but they're not. When they try to make them about left-wing values, they fail. People want conservative values because conservative values are real, they matter. Everybody's a conservative. Everybody is. When you ask Bernie Sanders, who talked about how evil millionaires are and how evil it was to own so many houses, he owns 3 houses. How anybody can follow that guy after that one sentence, Bernie Sanders owns 3 houses. If you still believe that this guy is actually representing socialism, you're as much of a sucker as all the rest of them were. Fidel Castro claimed to represent the people of Cuba, and when he died, they took a look into his personal bank account, and there was $900 million. The daughter of Hugo Chavez is worth $4.5 billion. The country is starving, she's worth $4.5 billion. It's for suckers. And people are starting to know it. Young people are aware of it. They're not exactly conservative yet, but they say, these damn feminists, these damn social justice warriors. And now, as it gets more and more flagrant, they say, does everything have to be about Trump? Can't a Star Trek episode not be about Trump now? They're actually defending Donald Trump, young people. Not so much because they like his politics, but because they can't stand the idea that these miserable, relentless, godless, evil bastards will not leave them alone, or any of us alone. They just won't stop. So, we win. They gave it their best shot, and they lose. They didn't change people's personal core values, because you can't. That's why we're conservatives. We believe that the values we have now are just as true in ancient Greece as they are today. We believe that people are made out of stuff, and that's what makes them people. You cannot make a new person. You can't do a Soviet revolution or a French revolution and create new people with different ideas. It doesn't happen. We're made out of this. We win. They lose. Biology wins. They lose. What does this mean going forward? Well, the cultural war is won, but it's not over. And most of the serious bleeding is yet to come. Things are going to get worse before they get better. We're going to see a lot more temper tantrums. We're going to see a lot more tearing up of things. You hear a lot more calls for violence. You're going to hear a lot more shrieking, a lot more yelling, a lot more screaming. And every time they do, more and more people will come to realize that this is some kind of mental illness, that there's something really wrong with them, and that the reason they can't be forward about their ideas really doesn't come down to policy or politics or taxation or socialism or anything. They're just no fun. They're just no fun. They're just a bunch of mean, miserable weenies who do nothing but complain because that's all they can do. They want to complain themselves into wealth, and most people look at them and say, you've got nothing that I'm interested in, and it doesn't matter how old they are. So, it's going to get worse before it gets better, but what happens after that? Last night I was at an event in Lewiston, and before we went to the event, I was at Gary Peters' hangar. He's got this collection of World War II and older airplanes. And I walked into this hangar, and I'm a pilot and I love airplanes, and I walked into this hangar, and the first thing I see is this P-51 Mustang, the greatest fighter of World War II, and I said, oh. And I walked up to this thing, and I ran my hand across the leading edge of the wing, and I looked at this fighter jet. It was made in 1944, and I realized, I said to both Gary and to his maintenance guy, I said, this airplane looks like it was manufactured this morning. Looks like it was manufactured this morning. Went in the back where there were biplanes from 1926. Perfect. The leather, brand new, all of it restored. It looked like it was built today. There's a P-38 Lightning, a pretty rare warbird, called Glacier Girl. If you look at it now, Glacier Girl looks like it came out of the factory this morning, but it didn't. It sat at the bottom of a glacier, frozen in ice, for 40 years. And when they finally uncovered it, it was nothing but a collection of rust and plates busted and hoses. The tires had rotted away. The single best flying warbird today is a P-47 that sat 200 feet at the bottom of a lake from 1945 until 2005. And when they pulled this corroded, rusty hulk out of the water, they sat down with toothbrushes and started to rebuild it bit by bit. If you see that airplane that sat 50 years in the bottom of that lake today, you would swear that it was manufactured this morning. So what does that mean? What it means to me is that damage can be undone. Yes, they've damaged this country. Yes, they've horribly damaged this country. They've done almost irreparable damage to our institutions. They've disheartened the American people. They've spread their poisonous philosophies. We saw them assassinate Brett Kavanaugh. We saw them assassinate Donald Trump. We look around and we see nothing but wreckage of what we used to love and what we believe. But these guys out there saw this wreckage under a glacier, the wreckage that was at the bottom of the lake for 50 years. And they decided, well, it's either going to stay wreckage or we're going to do something about it. And one piece at a time, little aluminum squares this big, they drilled out the rivets and pulled it off. They put it on a fresh piece of aluminum, and they cut out the new piece, and they put the new rivet holes there, and they riveted the new piece of aluminum on, one down, 743 to go. And then they went to the next one. And now you can look at those airplanes that lived in the bottom of the ocean. Their tires weren't just flat, the rubber was gone. And you can look at that airplane, and it's better than it was the day it came out of the factory. Better than it was the day it came out of the factory. This ruin is not permanent. We can restore it. We can make it not only as good as it was, we can make it better than it was. It's entirely up to us. All it takes is a massive amount of work. Something like 185,000 man-hours to restore that airplane that was at the bottom of the lake. But that airplane looks like it was made today. It's beautiful. This is a beautiful country. It's a beautiful, shiny, silver country. They're telling you that it's a corroded, rusted piece of old metal, and I say it's not. And I have the proof that it's not. We can restore this country rivet by rivet. It's going to take a lot of work and a lot of time. But the idea that this is gone and never coming back is an idea that we can either believe or not believe. If you've ever seen a Model T that was once a rusting orange hulk on blocks that was lovingly restored to brand new status and runs boom down the street like that, then you know I'm right. You know I'm telling the truth. We can restore. We can put it back as good as new. They have given it their best shot, and they have failed. They've failed. They've lost. We win. They've lost. Now, our job is to undo the wreckage. Now, you may not believe me, but I think the one thing we can all agree on is I'm never wrong. Thanks very much for having me. It's been a pleasure coming back tonight.